Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is probably is it our second or third, Chris, in this series?
It's a third LinkedIn Live. It's our second in cyber risk management specifically.
Okay, so I'm going to do this. Chris Batillo is the CEO and president of Rhyno Healthcare. And as Chris kind of mentioned, this is our third LinkedIn Live, the second one, the topic. And obviously today's subject is the 5 healthcare cyber risk mitigation tricks you can use to sleep well at night, which I love. You know, it must be a marketing thing. And we're lucky to have not only, Chris with us today, but Jesper, and I'll kind of let you introduce Jesper, and really more importantly, to kind of cover, some of these tricks that you can employ to, to help avoid the cyber risks that are just growing every day. So Chris, with that, I'm going to turn that over to you and let you swing away.
All right, thanks. And again, so Rhyno Healthcare Solutions, we serve a lot of advisory services, and we've talked about those before. But we realize that IT takes a village, and you're all about your partnerships with your vendors and everything, and other companies. And along the way, we've been a partner with Maxxsure Cyber Risk Management, and they are the leader in risk management audits and future roadmaps and things like that. And so Jesper Salberg is on the phone. He is the CTO. As you can tell, there is no face to Jesper because he is that dedicated to risk mitigation that he wanted to stay anonymous. But he's the man behind the curtain, and has some deep knowledge, much deeper than mine, on best ways to avoid. To engage risk mitigation and to avoid cyber risk issues. So you'll hear from Jesper as part of this conversation. And just again, to kind of lay the groundwork here, in our first LinkedIn Live event back in June, we talked about how to avoid being the cyber risk healthcare attack, the next cyber risk healthcare attack. And we talked about a 3-legged approach at that point. And one of those was risk mitigation. One of those was governance and policies, and one of them was technical resiliency. And we said at that time, we were talking about 30,000 feet because that's all you can within an hour for this topic. We said we'd come back and break each one down into more detail. And what we decided to start with was risk mitigation, because again, that's where you really should be starting. The technical resiliency is critical. The policies are also critical. But if you don't have the data, if you don't know what you're trying to avoid, how do you plan for it? How do you budget for it, et cetera? So that's the depth of this conversation. So we're going to focus on risk mitigation today. And since our talk in June, there's been additional cyber attacks, both by bad players and by accidents. If you want to talk about Sensian, they had a cyber attack back in June. We all know about the CrowdStrike mishap in July. Now, again, that wasn't an attack. That was a mistake. But, cyber mistakes cause just as much damage as cyber attacks in certain cases. And many organizations were impacted by that as well. So, as IT infrastructure, IT is evolving and can become more complicated, both internally and with external partners. This conversation just needs to happen and continue to happen. So, risk mitigation is not a one and done. It's like we talked about. It has governance. It has ongoing budgets. It has ongoing work. It has an ongoing understanding, and that's what we're going to get into depth of now. So again, Jesper is an expert from Maxxsure. Maxxsure is a company that can do evaluations of your risk mitigation, put plans together, and they have something called an M-score, and I think we talked about this in June as well. And it's an M-score technology that can help evaluate your system, people, processes, technology, third-party partnerships, all those types of things, and break things down into different groups of actions. And we'll talk more about that as well.
So, Chris, can you do me a favor? Let's start from a high-level viewpoint. Let's talk about the current landscape. Let's talk about some of the challenges that are facing IT folks in healthcare, and just kind of work our way down from that.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, again, healthcare, it's increasing frequency of cyber attacks, and not just in healthcare, but everywhere else. But obviously in healthcare, the data is a lot more protected. We've got patient data. We've got HIPAA. We've got all these areas that we need to actually secure even more so than other data in other industries. There's more digital operations. There's new technologies. There are ongoing relationships with third-party vendors that are critical to business operations. And no one is an island anymore. You cannot run your business without having some other company or involvement or partnership in order to do your day-to-day operations. It's the volume of scale, and it's also with the technologies from other areas. Once you start talking about private clouds and public clouds and third-party SaaS solutions, that just makes our environments that much more complex, and therefore we have to be that more vigilant in order to make sure that we're secure. 2024, as we can see, these events are happening more and more often, and it's getting to be where 5 years ago it was a disaster was only, deemed a physical disaster, a flood, fire, that type of thing, and you can build a resiliency plan based on distance, let's say. That doesn't work anymore in cyber attacks. It's totally different technologies, totally different recovery times, totally different tools that are needed. And in order to understand all that, you need to start with risk mitigation.
So good. Thank you for the segue, Chris, because I'm sitting here thinking, okay, well, besides the fact I can barely spell mitigation, I can hardly pronounce it. And Jesper, I'll turn this over to you. And I can attest, by the way, that Jesper is real. I saw him before we came on. He's not some AI bot or anything, Jesper. So, but I want you to, Jesper, as the CTO of Maxxsure, you can probably do a good job of giving me what, the dumb guy in the room, a definition of kind of risk mitigation, right? And how it relates to, cyber risk and mitigating cyber risk. So maybe if you can help give a non-educated guy a good working definition that we can kind of use moving forward.
Absolutely. And happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me to participate. So risk mitigation, it really starts with empowering all of the leadership to understand what is at risk and how do we make sure that whatever happens, we land in a place where cyber incidents does not create a financial impact that could threaten the existence of the business, right? We have to be able to preserve and continue. So at very high level, it is really about getting an overall understanding. What is our cyber risk exposure landscape for the organization? And that involves the full landscape, people, process, and technology. What are the digital crown jewels that are at risk? How can we be monetized from bad actors? Chris, you made a great example of CrowdStrike. That's part of what we call insider threat. It's just accidental outages from IT, from mishaps and lack of governance or procedures or testing and validation before we let some new change go loose, right? So it doesn't matter whether it is accidental or glitches or skipping steps, avoiding to use certain best practices because, quote unquote, it's inconvenient and takes longer or there's cost associated with it. If you do those things without understanding what's at risk and how much could it hurt the bottom line, disrupting the business, take us down, suffering of cost and losses. So it really is about the financial lens first. And that's what cyber risk management is about versus cybersecurity. It is the more strategic layer of mapping out and understanding at the leadership and board level, what are the governance mandates? Let's make sure that we stay within legal compliance, and healthcare is regulated. So there's also that aspect of legal impact, reputational damage following incidents, and fees, fines, and judgments that can come into play on top of all the other costs that can happen as part of incidents. So high level is really to understand that big picture and empower leadership to see and understand that in clear terms. And business leadership, they're not technologists. That's not what's first and foremost to them. So create and understand this in business language, and then empower the organization to understand what is at risk. If you suffered an incident tomorrow, could you pinpoint down to the dollar what kind of cost and losses you could expect to have? And then, of course, the financial conversation then becomes, okay, if we understand that, do we have that kind of financial reserve sitting around ready to write checks to bring in the cavalry and restore operation, detect and contain and recover from, and make sure we get out of this while, in the shortest period of time as possible, and also then be able to continue the operation of the business without having suffered significant financial harm. Amongst public traded companies, there was regulation that came in end of last year, where you now have to report on your cyber risk management program. You have to report on cyber incidents if they are material in nature. And a lot of public traded companies are struggling with, well, how do we know if it's material or not? What's going to happen? Classic old saying from Peter Drucker, what you don't measure, you can't manage. So it's really about getting an understanding and put a program together where you can measure and manage your cyber risk, regardless of the nature of incident types. That's the complex part, right? It's a big sprawl. It spans everything you do. And to Chris's point, digital operation, we've continued to see that expansion of the digital operation, digital transformation, more and more connected systems, more and more third-party vendors being part of your business rhythm and doing certain critical functions for your purpose of business. And that becomes single point of failure at times. We saw that with the big healthcare incident that happened, right? $2 billion in emergency funding was needed across the industry to keep smaller healthcare operations afloat because they cash flowed out, they dried up, and money didn't flow. And that was just existential threat from cyber risk. And so cyber risk also includes that strategic choice of the vendors. You put your eggs in their basket, and if they can't uphold their portion of it, that's part of it as well. So there's a lot of things to gain an understanding of at high level, and then plan out and execute against how do we now de-risk ourselves in the appropriate way. So that's sort of a high level, even before you get to the actionable part of, well, what and where do we mitigate? It is to get that high level risk assessment and understanding.
I want to go just a quick question. Like, is there cyber risk insurance even available these days? I mean, are companies or firms, or because you mentioned basically having the cash reserves in the event of, right, something where it could be catastrophic and you'd have to cash up. But are there even insurance companies that are offering policies for this?
Yeah, excellent point. Yes, so the cyber insurance industry has been a very interesting market in itself, and there is an ability to make, part of your risk strategy is part of mitigation is to think of it like a three-part pie. What business risks that you observe in your assessment of your risk and understanding of your risk landscape? Which ones can you accept? Which ones do you have to address and remediate? Whether that's technology investment, security team, or patching of software, or training up people. Which part of that remediation part can you fund with budget this year? That's probably only going to be a part of it. So there'll always be some level of what's called residual risk, which you then have to figure out, okay, we can't fund budget-wise, we can't fund addressing this in this fiscal year. What do we do with it? Well, that's where cyber insurance comes in. Risk transfer is part of that risk management strategy. And so the insurance coverage part is instrumental to make sure that you are managing a financial impact so that any incident, should it happen, and there's plenty of data to show that perfect cybersecurity is a myth. Something does happen to every company. The statistics are just there for decades now to show it. And so you have to manage the risk, and that means you also have to have a strategic choice of what size of cyber insurance do you bring to the table to make sure that you don't threaten the financial existence of the organization.
And a little bit more on that, Terrence. So cyber insurance is morphing every year. It's changing. And it's hard to get coverage. In reality, Rhyno is not a large company. We hold $25 million of cyber insurance. We have to do this through 5 different policies in order to make that happen. Wow. It's not like insurance where you go, listen, give me $2 million of liability coverage and you're the one policy and you're done. It's actually quite complicated to get. So imagine very large organizations that need to be covered. It's not as straightforward as you would think. Now, hopefully that'll change, and hopefully there'll be ways to make that better. But it definitely is something that is it's not set in stone right now.
Okay, well, why don't we dive into some of the risk mitigation strategies? That obviously is one of them. I didn't mean to take us off track there, but maybe if we can kind of talk through some of the different strategies that.
That makes sense. And to Jesper's point, if you do your risk mitigation right and you've broken it down to the pie chart of where you have your stuff that's accepted, stuff that can be transferred, and stuff that needs remediated, each of these 5 strategies falls into one of those categories. And some of it is pure remediation. So the first one actually is, let's talk about cybersecurity best practices.
So I want to make sure I'm clear on that too, Chris, that 3-piece pie that Jesper pointed out. You should look at each one of these 5 areas of risk mitigation and your strategy and assess what you're going to put
into each of those categories.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And ultimately, that's how you build your roadmap. That's how you build your budgets. That's how you build your execution plan of what you can do this year, next year, the year after, as well as, well, this is something we're going to either accept the risk or we're going to transfer it into some sort of insurance or something else. So.
And like you've said before too, like there's, and I think Jesper touched on it too, right? There's a long-term plan, right? And there's kind of a short-term plan, and you kind of probably are reassessing that. You're trying to put together a long-term plan based on each category and the three pieces of the pie, but then assessing it, I don't know how often. Obviously, you can talk about it, but again, it's a strategy. It's a long-term strategy. It's nothing that gets set in stone and say, "Great, we're using it." It's a roadmap.
Which is why tools like the M-Score from Maxxsure allows you to evaluate and then reevaluate and then reevaluate. So it's an ongoing change, and that's the important part. So if we go through our first mitigation strategy, let's just talk about cybersecurity best practices. So I think Jesper mentioned, I think I said it as well. You can't just rely on IT to fix all these problems. You can have the best tools out there, and we'll go through some of those in a moment. And they'll do a really good job, and good and strong security organizations will say, hey, we can detect issues. We typically, when we do run our tests, we can detect that an issue has occurred within a day and a half, 2 days. Well, in reality, sometimes it takes longer than that. Sometimes it takes a week, 14 days before you even realize there is an issue. And then what do you do about that? How much impact has there already been to your business? How much recovery time do you actually need? And this goes, and I'm not going to talk about technical resiliency in this thing too much, but that also changes your backup and restore strategies and actually recovery time strategies, because the further you go out and have to restore things, you're doing different than if you're just restoring from a backup from the first couple days. So anyway, but let's take cybersecurity best practices. Let's talk about the technologies. There's tools like security information event management. There are firewalls. There's IDPS, there's endpoint detection. CrowdStrike was one of those, if we talk about that. And every organization must constantly adjust, update, optimize, operate these tools. And that basically becomes your first line of defense. Are you doing everything you possibly can to do automatic detection, automatic recovery, automatic assessments, all these things that you want to do? Do you have the right malware protection in place to deal with those? That's your first line of defense, and that's what a lot of people are saying. Okay, that's our cybersecurity is our risk mitigation. Well, yes and no. That's your first line of defense, but that's not going to solve every problem. So yes, is it required? 100%. Should it be fully funded and budgeted and managed and operated? 100%. Is it the end game? Unfortunately, not. Not in the world that we live in today. And then obviously from that, you're constantly doing your security auditing and monitoring, and you're reporting and you're testing and you're doing your phishing exercises, and you're adjusting your malware and you're doing your patching. All these things just become business as usual operations that are required to maintain your organization. So obviously, first mitigation strategy is make sure you have your foundation correct. Make sure your foundation is strong. That at least gives you, we're doing everything we can. We're evaluating everything that we can do. And hopefully that takes care of a majority of what we need to deal with on a day-to-day basis, but it doesn't solve the entire problem.
Can I ask you a quick question? You've mentioned the M-Score a few times, and obviously this is falling under this category. That's kind of where you start with. Do you guys have like an example, or can you walk me through maybe what that looks like?
Yes, Bert, I'm going to throw that one over to you.
Yeah, happy to. And I believe I'm trying to screen share something here as well, so we've got a little bit of visual support.
I think we see it.
Yep. We see it now. We got it.
Excellent. Yeah. So the M-Score is really, it's a business metric. It's chosen to be designed around 1,000 skills. So the data science we do is that to empower all of leadership, board, CEO, CFO, risk committees, compliance officers, for everybody to understand it, it becomes a common language to have 1,000 skills to express what is the security posture at current, what is the maturity of governance and controls and best practices, and what is the level of threat and vulnerabilities we're seeing across in the entire technology inventory. And so we factor in 7 different what we call factors, as you see here in the orange boxes around the organization. So it's a landscape view, and all these 7 factors gets this score associated with it and it's based on the data in your operation. So this helps create a landscape view of everything that is relevant for the cyber risk perspective and managing that risk. And so it's both an internal and an external aggregation. So there's an outside in view. That's called an external M score. Then there's the internal, and then they combine up to an entity score. So it helps all the leadership to understand. Chris, you had a great point earlier. I think you said it takes the village. And so that is the true part of it. Cyber risk and the innovation of what the cybercrime industry is doing has led to that it takes the full village to protect and safeguard. So this M score is a way to present analytics about where is the company today, what are we doing, how are we standing with the security posture today across certain aspects, how is the maturity of governance, where is there room to improve, and all of that in that financial backdrop lens of what's at risk financially, how bad could it get. So we use this M score to help create common language and common understanding across the functional areas in the business, so that there is a shared view of where do we need to focus. And that's what helps. It takes it from just being the individuals in the organization and their line of sight and view and opinion to something that is backed by data. So when there is recommendations made, it's backed by facts and operational data, and it becomes much more clear to the organization where we are, set the goals for where we want to be, both on these scores on security posture and governance maturity and and resiliency, but also from the financial side, what is it we need to empower the organization to manage the financial impact part. And so that's what the M score is about.
And there's our 3-piece pie. I like visuals, right? So, and when we talk about that financial risk, that's for me, it's easier, right? I'm that business guy, right? And so if you go back to that really quick, Jesper, the 3-piece chart there.
Certainly.
Just because I'm happy to admit I had to look up remediate again to understand that it's addressing the serious flaws, right? But I think that's important to put those. It's almost like 3 buckets, but let's call them the 3 pieces of your pie, right? Because you have kind of where would you start? Would you again when you're looking and assessing things, I assume that you're going to go after, you're going to remediate or take care of the obvious or the serious flaws first, and then go, okay, what are we willing to accept? That's going to go in that piece of the pie. And then what isn't covered by what you can attack in terms of remediated risk, and what you are not putting in the accepted risk, then you would kind of move over into the insured risk. Is that from just a dumb business guy assessment? Is that a pretty good view of it?
It is. There is, within the organization, there's the risk management function is actually a pretty sophisticated part of an organization's leadership and strategy tool set. So back to what I mentioned in the beginning is also, you can only make these decisions if you understand what is at risk. And so the financial backdrop is important to understand what is the right size measures we have to take. Okay, so you may be in a regulated industry like healthcare. So there are certain mandates. You just have to do this list of best practices, these tool sets. This is the governance framework. It's called HIPAA, or, whether it's the financial transactions that might be credit card, so credit card transactions typically is PCI regulation. So there's all these different types of frameworks for different purposes and different parts of operating the business. Right, HIPAA is very much about the sensitivity of the healthcare records, but there are tool sets that helps manage that. So the first part really is, and that was the slide I wanted to just quickly show.
Go for it. Yeah, go ahead.
Put a visual on it, which was how bad can it financially get? And so putting that into meaningful terms becomes a very empowering backdrop and context, so that financial leadership can understand, and maybe for the first time truly understand, what is at risk, why do we need to care so much, or how much do we need to pay attention to our cyber risk exposure profile. So for this company here, there's a breakdown. This is high level. In the top part, how much of our company valuation could take a hit if there's a significant incident and we have to make public disclosures. Our science and research shows that between 5 and 20% of company valuation can disappear if you have a significant cyber incident and you have to go public with it. Extreme cases are even bigger than that. CrowdStrike, like SolarWinds a couple of years ago, they dropped about 35% on the share price value in the 90 to 120 days after the incident. That may recover, but there is a financial impact. So if you're in the middle of due diligence or something else, you're trying to sell to private equity, these things are significant. The bright red part that says 45%, that's broken down into what we see in the middle, a single event loss. And it's so it's a probable maximum loss calculations. This is what I talked about financial reserves. These will be the projected hard costs of, given who you are, what you operate. This is the kind of financial reserves you got to figure out to have ready at all times, because nobody can really predict when a cyber incident happens. So you can't save up for it for 2 months knowing it's coming, right? So this is the financial stress part that you have to manage so that you land in a manageable impact area of the cost that associates with it. So the 29.5 million is broken down. Well, we got 5 million in cyber insurance coverage. That's only close to 17% of the costs. So now the leadership conversation is, we're 83% self-insuring on these 29.5 million. Do we have that kind of capital sitting around? By the way, it's 216% of EBITDA. So we're running without profit for more than 2 years after this. That's not fun either, right? So now you get metrics and language to the leadership that goes, okay, this might not be a good picture. We need to manage and de-risk. We need to strategize and roadmap our way to a place where this becomes more manageable. And there are many levers in this journey that we can pull on. One of them is, do we need a bigger cyber insurance policy? That's a short term for the first couple of years until we can de-risk ourselves through the remediation part as well. And then, of course, there's a breakdown of, well, how do you arrive at these loss numbers? Well, it's because we contain, you can see in this donut here, there's a significant amount of PII and healthcare records we're safeguarding. There's ways, and we can help do that in our solution, but we can help calculate the precise losses seen in the industry, in the country you operate in, given the volume and magnitude of data record sets you're safeguarding. You may have intellectual property at risk. What made you competitive? You invested in techniques, healthcare procedures, and other types of intellectual property. That's an investment that makes you competitive. If that's stolen, you lost all that investment and you are no longer unique. Somebody else has it and can repeat you and replicate you. What's the cost of the service disruption?
Which is probably in healthcare one of the larger areas, I would think.
Absolutely, right. And we can already tell that most of the industry and the small mid-sized part of the healthcare industry, they're very cash flow sensitive. They dry out very quick. And then that threatens the existence of payroll and employees. And well, there goes the company.
Well, and not only from the financial aspect, but from the member or the patient aspect. If they can't get services, if they can't get scheduled, if they can't get pharmacy, that's even more. That's as detrimental, if not more detrimental, than the financial impact to it.
Absolutely, there's real life health and risk. There's bodily injury and health at risk here, so to speak, as well. So a highly consequential industry.
Well, Chris, why don't we? And thank you, Jesper, for taking me through it.
This is just such a great slide.
It is. It's a great tool. Yep. And I'm sitting thinking of being in a boardroom and speaking of it looking like a donut. You're probably going to want to bring a couple boxes of donuts because it's not one. Go ahead, Chris.
Most CISOs will go in there and talk about their cyber resiliency and talk about all these wonderful tools, and that's great. And I'm all for it. I'm an IT guy. I love it. But in a boardroom, they're probably glazing over at 80%, going, okay, great. You show them a slide like this, and all of a sudden everybody sits up and goes, oh, okay.
100%.
Yeah.
So let's why don't we move to we're only at the first. Yeah, we've only covered the first one, right? Which really is an important one. So I'm glad we spent the time on it. But let's kind of move into the second risk mitigation strategy as it relates to, and we were talking obviously about healthcare. I know in fintech this comes into, but compliance and regulatory managed. But Chris, obviously, Rhyno Healthcare is primarily working in that space. You know it well. Maybe talk about some of the risk mitigation strategies that the healthcare systems and those in that healthcare environment can employ.
Yep. Jesper could probably dive into these a little deeper than I, so I'm going to ask him to start with number two, and then I'll just provide some color commentary along the way.
Sure. Jesper, you still there? You're clearing your throat.
I am. I was just getting the screen share out of the way here. Yeah. So obviously, across the remediation aspect, there's a lot of focus on IT-centric solutions right now, what we're really seeing is that, and this is again backed by data because that's just how we are. 85% of all data breaches upstream, the root cause is human error somehow, somewhere. And that can be the lack of having good procedures, investment in the right tools, or just the security awareness of people. So the ability to map out and give a granular view of across, let's take HIPAA because it's a great framework here for this particular industry of healthcare, right? It lays out all the different practices that you're supposed to be doing. So the ability to measure and manage where you are and how and where you should improve next is also a big part. A lot of CIOs and CISOs in general are struggling with, once they've done some of the basics, like we start having some backups, we start having some endpoint protections, we have a SOC service. Now what? Now what do we do? So now it's up to the individuals. And so putting a program together where you measure all of the operational risk footprint, people, process, and technology, helps you see and get line of sight to what's next in our list that is important to us. And then also, which part of the business area is it that has to have our focus first? Because within the organization, you can have partial breach scenarios, and they could lead to different financial probable maximum loss outcomes. So we have an ability to also help empower and drill down into and show you which part of your business has the biggest financial loss potential, cost and losses. And that can be 2, 3, 4, 5x spread on different parts of the business. If that gets impacted and that gets breached, it leads to 5x difference in cost. That's a significant extra as well. So there's ways to help justify it and bring to light what needs to take place. And that's what empowers the CISOs, the CIOs, and the head of ITs of the world out there to better go and bring the conversation to the budget sessions with the CFO. And now they're sitting shoulder by shoulder and they can both understand it and they're working together and everybody has a sense of return to what you need to remediate. Exactly. So I would say people practices is a low-hanging fruit that can often be overlooked. There's lots of great tools to invest in. There's lots of great services. So much is spent on the IT-centric part. And a lot of times there's a little bit of a pitfall that technologists can think that you can fix people risk with tech alone. It's really a blend of making sure that you support the people, you train them, you also validate them, right? So simple, cost-effective things, security awareness training, phish testing, those are just absolute firsts on the people front. The process side is where it gets really tricky, and that's where these types of metrics can help point out where does our data show that we should invest next? What kind of tool technique is it? In particular, right now, again, I'll tie it back to real world data. From cyber insurance claims, it's very, very clear that the top common data breach sources is either human error upstream, in-house, or through your vendors, you get attacked and suffer and become a victim of a data breach. So the supply chain risk management, the vendor third-party risk, as it's called, third and fourth party, your vendors and your vendors' vendors is seen to be a significant threat surface right now.
So let's take a second there for a second. So what we were saying before, obviously the compliance and regulatory management was our second strategy. We just talked through that. I mean, that's key. And that's, again, none of these are one and dones. These are all ongoing events and these are ongoing protocols. But let's talk third-party vendor because, we've done evaluations. We've done risk evaluations for some of our clients that have been doing projects and came and said, listen, what happens when we bring this application over? What happens when we migrate to this application versus that application? And what we found is you can manage certain things that you own. So if you run something in a private cloud, even if you run it in your own public cloud, you have some control over it. But when you have a third-party relationship with a large company, your ability to manage the threat is minimized significantly, both contractually and operationally and all these things. So we always found, like when we deal with third-party vendors, it became we tried to get in the contract, they said no, so we're just dealing with it type of thing. So Jesper, why don't you go through some of the third-party vendor risk assessments and specifically how you can measure those? Because to me, that's a black box.
Yeah, that's a great point. So today, and I'm going to make a prediction about the future here as well, but today there is that the current stance is that vendors are like a black box, right? You have a contract with them. They're supposed to supply XYZ, and there's some sort of agreement about uptime or whatever the connectivity, reliability, or the availability of it, the fidelity of it. So there's different types of principles when it comes to these types of platforms and services offered. What is possible today, and I'm sharing a little visual here again, is there's possibles to take your vendor risk management program to the next level. We're already seeing over time that each and every entity is beginning to see more and more regulatory demand. In practice, every entity in the US have some level of regulatory demand on them when it comes to data privacy. Most states today have a formal data privacy program, whether you're in healthcare or not. Within healthcare, it's even bigger. You got the HIPAA part, right? So the ability to observe at least the tip of the iceberg that I'm showing here, you can monitor and scan with or without consent. There are techniques, and we offer up that part of the program, is that you have the ability to observe your vendors and see, can we see any external vulnerabilities on their infrastructure or software? Do their employees, or of course you can do this for your own employees as well, but do we observe that there are data breach packages for sale on the dark web with company credentials from this vendor, right? And so that's a way to get a sense of what is their cyber resiliency and cybersecurity posture and the cyber health they offer up. And if you can see that on the outside, it's probably even worse on the inside. Now, if this is a strategic vendor to you, what I'm offering up for inspiration here, and this is my prediction that will happen by forced demand over time, is the fact that key customers or key entities, they will say our top, whatever it is, top 20 or top 50 most strategic, impactful vendors to us, we would want to know more about you. Today, if it's a system that's offered up, there is SOC 2 certifications, SOC 2 Type 2 certification as an attestation by a third-party auditor. That's a good first step, but it's point in time. It's once a year. Auditors comes in and they only sample for evidence. So the way of the innovation velocity in the cybercrime industry, my take is that that's just not enough. A continuous view into your cyber resiliency, your security posture, and your vulnerabilities is what's needed to keep up with the dynamics of cybercrime industry. So the ability to have metrics that represent the full landscape of the vendor is a way that you can, in your contract language, negotiate that in, that you have the rights to audit. You maybe even want to put certain metrics together. Department of Defense is doing that right now for the second round with their CMMC in version 2. All the defense contractors must adhere to certain resiliency levels given what's at risk in the contract level they're offering up. So we're seeing it coming. And I predict that vendors in the future will have to deal with more direct demands in the contract language of insight and audit in a more continuous nature. And that they have to document and demonstrate that they are secure, that they're safeguarding and running to best practices, and that they are resilient.
And you mentioned two important things right there, and this is going to propagate itself through your vendor partners and everything, is cyber insurance isn't cheap. Everyone's going to have to get more and more cyber insurance, and that's going to goes into their cost of business. SOC 2 audits, they're not cheap, and they have to, all these things need to be part of your operational budget. All these steps that are going to be from not just within your organization, but from your third-party organizations, they all have to be accounted for. And those are the things that will be required. As Jesper said, I think I 100% agree. These are going to be mandated. This is not going to be optional as we go forward. But we all have to figure out how that manages into our business, our day-to-day business.
Well, let's move on to number 4, and obviously data, integrity and having backup solutions with regards to your data is where this starts to become mission critical, right? Because
so this is an interesting one, and we've been working on some projects right now and dealing with recovery exercises on data restores and things like that. So I'm going to jump in for a second, and then Jesper can obviously join in and give some more depth to it, I'm sure. But, there is the strategies for data backup and data integrity and backups is not what it was if you're talking just about a physical disaster. When you're talking about a cyber disaster, you don't know necessarily how far back you're going to have to go. You may find out after a week that you've had that event, 2 weeks you had the event. You may end up having to go 30 days back in order to get to data that is secure, functional, and what that does is two things. It increases the amount of storage that you're going to need, and potentially you may change your backup paradigm based on how much storage you're doing and the length of time that you're doing backup. So in other words, you might use one technology for backups that need to be restored within the first couple of days. You might use a lower end backup and restore solution for things that go further out, just in order for cost savings and whatnot, type of storage use, etc. Well, what does that mean? That means your business needs to understand that your recovery objectives, your RTOs and RPOs, we talked about that in June, your recovery time objectives and your recovery point objectives, they change. And what may take normally, let's just say a data restore takes a couple of hours, may take a couple of days, because now you're using different technologies. So all those things need to be understood. So when you're coming up with your backup solutions, you may need more than one. You're going to need more than one location. You're going to need more than one technology. And then you're going to need that education, understanding, hey, guys, if in the case of a cyber event, 4-hour RTO probably isn't achievable anymore, because we will have to deal with a bunch of things of getting the data, restoring the data, and technology is just what it is. It's just going to take longer. So it's very interesting that it's a matter of doubling up on your strategy, first of all, increasing your budget, second of all, because you're going to need more storage and more capabilities, and then making sure there's good education on what that technology is going to bring to the end users and to the business. I don't know, Jesper, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent perspective to bring to light here. And I will allow me to tie it up back to support for the budget ask, because again, tying this back to the business level impact and dollars and cents. Well, every ransomware group out there knows that backups is the difference between them getting their ransomware paid or not. So they will, in their approach to entrench an organization and compromise them, they will seek out to get themselves injected into the backups first before they log up all the machines, so that the client is ending up having no choice because their backups are corrupted. They cannot get to them and restore. So it's the difference between, from the bad actor side, getting paid or not. That's important to understand the adversary, right? Know your enemy, so to speak. And with that in mind, it becomes a bigger conversation with the leadership to get the right justification of the budget for it, right? So the business case presentation, these types of metrics, this kind of approach where you can calculate the losses, that helps bring the case to the budget discussion, and the justifications are easily achieved. So the days of budgets getting fulfilled, we're seeing a trend on that as well, right? 100% budget ask from the CIO's function, they don't happen at the CFO table unless there's common understanding. And this is why these programs and this kind of metric and the ability to calculate loss becomes part of getting the right sized data scenario. And I'm from the days where I remember floppy disks and tapes, and cold storage backups is actually one of those old-fashioned but really good approaches to also secure something that is cold storage. That could be the difference at the end of the day between you
just had to shiver up my spine, Jesper.
Is that because it was cold storage, or is there a drop?
Yeah, just the thought of that again. Oh my God, it's.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are more modern cold storage options today, but I'm aging myself here by saying this, but cold storage is a really important part to understand, that the bad actors, the first thing they'll do is they want to seek out where are the backups so we can lock them up.
My history, my entry point into healthcare IT was with radiology and cardiology imaging. And I just remember the days of the shelves and shelves and shelves of MODs and tapes. Oh my God! You needed to retrieve something. Someone physically have to go and put the MOD into the archive. Oh, those were the days. Yeah.
Well, the concept of cold storage can be important from a ransomware perspective, right? So
yeah,
it becomes all of a sudden
they can't get at it. Exactly, they can't get at it.
Now you're tying financial risk and financial management of this together with the IT strategy. And so it creates understanding around the organization, and the budgets can then happen as well. So we see a lot of supporting the IT function in presenting the needs in the right way and getting better justification for the budget asks to make these things happen. They are important.
All right. I think so. I think we're on to our fifth mitigation strategy, employee training and awareness. Jesper, you want to just take a crack at that one? I mean, it's a pretty obvious one, but I think it's just as important as all the others.
Very important. Yeah, I've already alluded to it. The annual data breach study shows that somewhere around 80 to 85% of all data breaches, they have human error as upstream root cause. And so within the bad actor cybercrime industry, there is this saying that the amateurs will hack systems, the pros, they hack people. If you can persuade or misrepresent or trick somebody into handing over their credentials through phishing or otherwise, you have a golden set of credentials that are live and valid, and you just surf through every security fence there is in the organization, right? Or there are techniques that can evolve to avoid it. But again, that's back to understanding the full framework of good practices.
Right, IAM and all that stuff that goes with it.
Yeah, IAM, but and things like geographic IP fencing and other things that you have whitelisted and blacklisted regions that can access it, or abnormal login attempts. Why are you both logging in over here on the Pacific time zone as well as in Eastern Europe, right? 2 minutes apart. That doesn't jive. You can't fly that fast. So there's lots of different anomaly detection and other types of SIEM tools and logging monitoring that can help look at when was an employee's credentials compromised, and they're now used in abnormal ways. So it kind of ties back to the remediation from a technology perspective. But there is no doubt that people are by far the biggest weakness in the security fence and security posture.
I heard this not too long ago, and Chris, you correct me. It may have been in a conversation we've had, but there was an example of a hack where they had, I believe, taken credentials of a C-level, a CFO, and had then used that to go downstream, down a couple of levels to a, let's call it, an operations person. They had started a new partnership with a vendor, and this CTO or CFO, it was a CFO, I believe, credentials were sent an email basically telling this operations person, hey, we just brought on this new, partner. You were supposed to send XYZ, payment to them by tomorrow. Get that out ASAP type of thing. I don't know if it's you, Chris, but that's an example, Jesper, of what I think of in terms of hacking the people side. And I want you to tell me if there's more examples like that, and if that kind of fits what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm constantly getting, I'm sorry, Jesper, but I'm constantly getting screenshots from even my own employees. And again, Rhyno, we're not a large company, where I've sent a text to somebody from a number saying, hey, this is Chris. I can't talk to you right now, but just let me know when you got this text. And they'll send it to me, and I'm like, well, that wasn't me. And who am I? I'm a nobody. But imagine that on a scale of 1,000 times over. That's happening all over the place.
Absolutely. Those are both great examples. And Chris, to that point, whenever text messaging begins to come in, impersonating via text message to your staff, it means that you are in the crosshair of the bad actors, the cybercrime industry. There is a group somewhere out there that's now officially targeting you and your organization. They got their eyes on you.
That's why I don't sleep at night.
Yeah. So Terrence, you're touching on another very big part of the people risk, the insider threat risk, and business email compromises is what it started with and have been going on for a number of years. The impersonation of the CFO instructing to wire money to somebody else, or somebody hijacks an email inbox in the accounts payable department, right? And they're sitting there patiently waiting for months, waiting for the right email conversation between the customer, the company, and a vendor to take place, or a client, and some sort of invoice payment demand going one way or the other. And then they jump in and they go, okay, by the way, we've just changed our banking recently, so here's the new account and routing numbers that you should wire the payment to. Okay, here we go. And off the money goes into the bad actor account. The example you gave, Terrence, is one, and this ties back to why I'm not on camera today. Is there is an upcoming rising risk from the power of artificial intelligence. I'll give you an example that's even worse. A CFO in Hong Kong was supposedly on a Teams or a WebEx or a Zoom call with his financial team on camera, internal team call, and he instructed them over the video live feed to wire money, $25 million to a certain payment. And the team did it. That was not the CFO. He was impersonated in face and audio in that internal web meeting call. So the tool sets that are bringing us a lot of benefits, productivity, and can do a lot of good things for healthcare can also be weaponized. And the cybercrime industry is all over it. And there's a lot of unknown or unpredictable outcomes in the risk landscape for what does the adoption of AI lead to in that sense. But right now,
and real quickly, so we're hitting 50 minutes into this, and this is fantastic. We'd probably go for another hour if we needed to. But Jesper, you and I were talking a little bit yesterday about the AI impact of risk mitigation, and obviously it adds another layer of complexity. Why don't we just give me some 5 minutes on that before the end of the call?
Yeah, absolutely. So I see there's three great risk scenarios you have to consider as everybody's in jumping into invest in and utilize AI. The productivity gains are obviously miraculously attractive, but first off is do a very good scrutiny on the vendors of the AI products that you choose to consider. If you are an AI vendor building something, there is an arising set of good practices and frameworks for what it takes to develop securely that kind of product and offer it up to the healthcare industry. If you are a healthcare industry provider or service element to it, make very, very distinct scrutiny on vendor selection. Make sure that don't just settle for a SOC 2 report. You need to understand the bigger aspect of how was it developed, how was it trained, is it what's called an open loop or a closed loop? Is it susceptible to being poisoned by learning from bad data? There's lots and lots of, there's probably a whole conversation and topic, another session just around that. But all of those aspects of how was it built, how was it trained, how is it secured, the data and process trust we put into it, how is that going to be leveraged? Are you going to use that data for your own gains as a vendor to learn and do other things? Is our data going to be commingled with this offering being available to other vendors? The commingling part is a big no-no as well. So, putting good safeguards around it and where it's stored and run and executed from, is that secure as well? The data center side, all of that. And R&D, I'm aware of how developers work. And we've not, in 40 years, we haven't made secure code. It's always a need to patch and update it. And so when you do that, when there is an update to the product you're using, does that change the learning? Does that change the outcome of the data? So if you're leveraging AI for, say, healthcare analytics and treatment plans, when the vendor updates the product, in what way does that impact the data analytics? Could it change the recommended healthcare plans? What does that mean? Does that lead to liability and risk? Could it lead to, malpractice or unfortunate outcomes? There's a whole risk and liability downstream that is still not clear to us. If the system goes down and it has to be restored, do you lose the learning? Do you have to start over? If you have to relearn it, does it lead to the same type of health analytics? All of those have real human health impact. And there's still a lot of gray area. So we don't really know where that ship is headed to. And that's uncharted territory we'll just have to figure out along the way. But to me, that's how I think about the cyber risk of that. How is it made? How is it used? How do we make sure that there is a fidelity in the data analytics and outcomes that it generates, that we can trust it to really treat human health with?
And with every other new technology, mistakes will be made. People will learn as we go. So go back to the CrowdStrike thing. That was a mistake. That was, whether it was done because of poor testing or whatever. Moving to AI, where everybody's learning, everybody's testing, proof of concepts, all these things that are out there, there are going to be things we need to deal with, and that's just something we need to manage. And to your point, it's just another area where we can impact our organization. Well, it's 55 minutes after another wonderful session. We really appreciate everyone's time and coming in and Terrence, you, of course, driving the conversation. And Jesper, thank you so much for all that you've brought to this. It's been amazing. I guess what we want to leave with is what we started with. This is not a one and done. Risk mitigation is one of the 3 legs that we talked about in avoiding cyber risk attacks. What we can go into other sessions about the technology resiliency and the governments and the policies and all that for sure, and we will. But regardless of how you do it, talk to your organization and figure out how you want to engage in a risk mitigation plan and how you want to get the data that you need in order to put a plan and a roadmap and a governance together. So for those 3 legs of acceptance, transfer, and remediation. So please, if you take nothing else away from this, and this isn't just to make people sleep less, but this is a way to make you sleep better, is take the next steps and figure out how you do risk mitigation. Obviously, if you have any questions, you can reach out to Rhyno Healthcare Solutions. We can bring in our partners as necessary, but ultimately, regardless of how you do it, do it.
Yeah, and I would just, as we wrap up here, I know we talked about the M score and Jesper and Chris, if they reach out to you guys and as well, in terms of this isn't gonna, we could do hours of these, right? Which we plan on doing, Chris. And so, if you have, in terms of let's call it a call to action here. If you're looking to get an M score for your organization, Chris, should they go directly to Maxxsure? Should they come to Rhyno?
Either way, you can come to Rhyno. We'll put you in touch with our partners over at Maxxsure. If you go to Maxxsure directly, that's fine as well. I mean, ultimately, I think the call to action is just to make sure that people are secure.
I love it. Well, guys, I appreciate your time today. We'll look forward to doing the next one. And in the meantime, too, as well, as if you have things topics that you want to hear covered, you want to hear more examples of, cyber, risk. If you want to hear other things, feel free, reach out to Chris, Jesper, myself, so we can get that on the next.
Yeah. If we're going to do more examples, we'll have to do this at night so I can have a bourbon instead of a coffee.
I love it. I tell you what, I have some ideas I had when I was going to bring up. I'm going to pitch. I'm going to save that for the next one. So. I'll join you with that bourbon, a bourbon and a Malbec. How about that?
And Jesper, we just put a nice little I am into our chat. I'm going to just end with this. When you measure, and then you can manage, and then you can sleep. I mean, I think that's awesome. Thank you for putting that out there. The truth is, you can manage what you know, and then this is one way to get there. So, appreciate everybody's time. I hope you guys enjoy these as much as we do. We'll be back in the next couple of weeks with another topic. In the meantime, have a great weekend, everybody, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesper.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.